It had been a long day at work, and I was looking forward to the quiet of home. I work long hours, and my shift had just ended at 11 p.m. The commute back was usually a peaceful one. I live about 45 minutes outside the city, in a more rural area where the roads get darker, quieter, and lonelier the closer you get. It's something I had grown used to over the years, but tonight, a strange fog had rolled in, giving the surroundings an eerie, almost cinematic feel. The road I take home is long and isolated, lined with thick trees that stretch endlessly on both sides, making the road seem like a tunnel. The only sounds were my car's tires on the asphalt and the faint whisper of the wind rustling through the trees. No streetlights, only the occasional glow from my headlights slicing through the fog. As I drove, I started noticing a blinking light up ahead, barely visible through the dense mist. I couldn't quite place where it was coming from. It seemed to hover in the distance, flickering erratically. My mind immediately went to a broken-down car, maybe someone in need of help. But before I could think much of it, the light vanished completely. Odd. I slowed down, cautious. My speed dropped to around 15 to 20 miles per hour, my eyes scanning the road ahead as best as they could through the fog. And then, as if out of nowhere, a small car emerged directly in front of me. It had been hidden by the mist, and before I could even react, I lightly tapped its rear bumper with mine. The soft jolt sent my heart racing, but it wasn't enough to do any real damage. I stopped my car and stepped out, expecting to see a driver come out and assess the situation. I could see movement inside their vehicle, but they didn't get out right away. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Did they not see me? Was the fog so thick that they had misjudged pulling out? After what felt like a minute, the driver's side door finally opened, and a large man stepped out. He was easily over 6 feet tall and heavy-set, with a grim expression and a way of moving that instantly put me on edge. Something about him didn't feel right. His body language was closed off, and his refusal to make eye contact only added to the tension. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice sounding much calmer than I felt. "You pulled out pretty fast there." He barely responded, mumbling something under his breath, maybe an apology, maybe not. I couldn't be sure. The whole time, he avoided looking directly at me, staring down at the ground or over my shoulder. My nerves were on high alert now. Something was wrong, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. My mind flashed through all sorts of scenarios. Was he drunk? High? Or was there something more sinister at play? "I don't think there's much damage," I said, feeling the urge to leave creeping up inside me. "I'll just be on my way." But as I turned to get back in my car, he stopped me. "Wait," he said, finally lifting his head, though his eyes still didn't meet mine. "I need to check my car first." I hesitated, not wanting to seem rude or suspicious, but every instinct in my body was telling me to get out of there. Still, I waited as he walked around his car, inspecting every side with exaggerated thoroughness. He lingered at the back where the bump had occurred, and then, to my surprise, he began walking around to the passenger side of the vehicle. That's when I saw the faint movement inside the back seat of his car. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me through the fog. But no, there was definitely someone in the back seat, and they were about to open the door. My pulse skyrocketed. Without thinking, I dashed back to my car, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut, locking it in one fluid motion. Just as I did, the second man, the one from the back seat, stepped out. He was smaller than the driver, but no less intimidating, his face shadowed and unreadable. Both men were now outside, waving their arms as if to stop me. My instincts were screaming at me to go, and I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into drive, slammed my foot on the gas, and swerved around their car, narrowly avoiding a tree on the side of the road. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. In my rearview mirror, I saw their headlights appear briefly, but they never followed. It was as if they realized their plan had failed and didn't bother to give chase. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station a few miles from home. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm myself down. My mind kept replaying the scene, wondering what would have happened if I had stayed just a little longer. To this day, I have no idea what their true intentions were, but I'm certain they weren't good. Maybe they were trying to rob me, or worse. The thought still haunts me whenever I drive down that foggy road. I've been a trucker for a few years now, and while the job has its perks, it also comes with its fair share of unsettling experiences. One of the most unnerving nights of my life happened about a year ago during a long-haul delivery. My job that day was to deliver frozen goods to several stores across 3 states, and with all the stops, I knew I wouldn't be home until the following day. The first part of the trip went smoothly, and by the time I had made my final delivery, it was nearing midnight. I still had several hours of driving ahead of me, but fatigue was setting in. My body was screaming for rest. The next truck stop was 40 miles away, and I figured I could make it there before pulling over for the night. The roads were quiet, with only the occasional car passing by, their headlights disappearing into the distance. As I drove down the dark highway, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars often drove behind trucks to save gas by drafting in the slipstream. But something about this car was different. It was too close, dangerously close, and it wasn't attempting to pass. For the next several miles, the car stuck to me like glue, its headlights glaring in my mirror. I grew more irritated and a bit uneasy. Why wouldn't they pass? Were they trying to intimidate me? The thought of road rage crossed my mind, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe they were just a careless driver. Finally, I saw the truck stop sign up ahead. I signaled to pull off the highway, expecting the car to continue straight, but it didn't. Instead, it followed me, pulling into the truck stop right behind me. Alarm bells went off in my head. Something wasn't right. I parked my truck in one of the far spots near the edge of the lot, where there were fewer lights. I like parking there because it's quieter and easier to rest. But as I sat in my truck, watching the car behind me, I started to regret that decision. The vehicle pulled up directly behind my trailer, idling there with its headlights off. I couldn't make out the driver's face, but the car was old, maybe from the late 90s or early 2000s, and it looked like an old police cruiser, rusty and beat up, with no markings. I got out of my truck, my heart racing. As soon as I shut the door, the car's engine roared to life, and it sped off into the night, disappearing down the road as if it had never been there. The whole situation made my skin crawl. Who were they? What did they want? Shaken but trying to stay calm, I walked around my truck, double-checking the locks and making sure everything was secure. It was nearly 1 a.m., and the truck stop was almost empty, save for a few other trucks parked in the distance. I tried to brush off the encounter as a random coincidence, maybe just a prank or a paranoid thought. I climbed back into the cab and tried to rest, but sleep didn't come easily. Every little sound made me jump. Every creak of the truck or gust of wind outside seemed magnified in the stillness of the night. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by a loud bang coming from the rear of my trailer. My pulse quickened, and I peered out the small window to see a shadowy figure moving near the back of my truck. Panic surged through me. Was it the same car from earlier? Grabbing the knife I kept for emergencies, I quietly opened the door and crept outside, staying low to avoid being seen. As I approached the back of my truck, I saw them a person crouched down, trying to tamper with the lock on the trailer. Their car was parked just behind my truck, headlights off, and the driver's door open. Without thinking, I shouted, "Hey, get the hell away from my truck." The figure froze for a split second before bolting towards the car. They jumped in, slammed the door, and sped off into the night. I barely caught a glimpse of the person, just a blur of dark clothing and a hood. Shaking, I checked the back of my trailer. The lock had scratches all around it, clear signs that they had tried to break in. Luckily, the truck was empty since I had completed my deliveries, but that didn't make the situation any less terrifying. What would they have done if I hadn't woken up? What if they had broken into the cab while I was asleep? I didn't wait around to find out. I started the truck, pulled out of the stop, and drove the rest of the night without stopping. the fear and adrenaline keeping me wide awake. To this day, I wonder who that person was and what they were planning. But one thing's for sure, I'll never stop at that truck stop again. Last summer, my friends and I went to a concert on the south side of Chicago. We had been looking forward to it for weeks, excited to see one of our favorite bands perform live. I'd heard a lot about the neighborhood's reputation. It wasn't exactly known for being the safest part of the city, but we figured we'd be fine as long as we stuck together and stayed near the venue. The concert was incredible. The energy of the crowd, the sound of the music pulsing through the air, it was everything we had hoped for. But by the time the show ended, it was already past 10 p.m., and the streets outside were packed with cars trying to leave. We were stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, inching forward at a snail's pace, and the frustration in the car was starting to build. "Why is it taking so long?" one of my friends groaned. "At this rate, we won't be home until midnight." I wasn't thrilled about sitting in traffic either, especially in a part of town that made me feel uneasy. One of my friends, the navigator of the group, pulled out their phone and started searching for an alternate route. "I found a shortcut," they said, pointing to a series of side streets that would take us back to the highway without having to wait in the congested main roads. It seemed like a good idea at the time, so we took a left turn and started weaving through quieter streets away from the concert traffic. At first, everything seemed fine. The streets were empty and we made good progress, but as we got deeper into the neighborhood, I started to feel uneasy. It was hard to explain, but something about the area felt off. There were groups of people hanging out on the corners, and it wasn't just the usual late-night crowd you'd expect. They were watching us as we drove by, their eyes following our car, their faces expressionless. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I kept driving, trying not to make eye contact. "That doesn't look good," my friend in the passenger seat whispered, pointing ahead. I followed their gaze and saw what they were talking about up ahead. A car was parked sideways in the street, blocking both lanes. There were no lights on, and we couldn't see anyone inside. It looked abandoned, but something told me it wasn't. "What do we do?" one of my friends asked, panic starting to creep into their voice. I didn't have time to think. I threw the car in reverse and backed up quickly, taking a turn down another side street to avoid the block. But as we turned the corner, my stomach dropped. There was another car parked sideways, this one blocking the road entirely. It was too dark to see if anyone was inside. But the situation was becoming clear. This wasn't a coincidence. We were being boxed in. "Lock the doors," I said, my voice shaking. My friends scrambled to do as I said, fear settling in the car like a thick cloud. Before we could figure out what to do, two men emerged from a nearby house. One of them, tall and muscular, approached my window, while the other hung back, watching from a distance. The man at my window gestured for me to roll it down. I cracked it open just a sliver, my heart pounding. "Where you headed?" he asked, his voice too casual for the situation. "We're trying to get to the highway," I replied, forcing myself to stay calm. "We got lost." He nodded slowly, looking back at his friend, then turned his attention back to me. "You're in the wrong part of town," he said, his tone shifting. It wasn't a warning, it felt more like a threat. Before I could respond, both men suddenly lunged at the car, yanking on the door handles, trying to get inside. My friend screamed, and I floored the gas, reversing out of there so fast I nearly hit a parked car behind us. The men didn't stop. They were shouting now, running alongside the car, trying to pry open the doors. One of them reached into the cracked window, and I slammed on the brakes just long enough to shove his arm out before speeding off. We drove in silence for the next few minutes, all of us too shaken to say anything. We didn't stop until we were back on the main road, surrounded by the safety of other cars and streetlights. It took a long time for the adrenaline to wear off, but even now, months later, I still get chills thinking about how close we came to something terrible happening. I don't know what those men wanted, but I'm just glad we escaped when we did. It was a hard lesson learned. Shortcuts aren't always worth it, especially in a place you don't know. And sometimes, the instincts that tell you something's wrong are the only thing that can save you.